This is our last systems lunch for the semester. Very happy to have Gün here to wrap it up. I've known Gün for a while. He's been working in just doing amazing work in the area of distributed systems for years. He was one of the pioneers of e-currency long before everybody knew what Bitcoin was. This is something that Gün was working on, and he had a vision for this stuff quite early, way ahead of the game, and continues to be, I think, ahead of the game. So like I said, he's a professor at Cornell. Now he's the founder of Ava Labs, and he also directs or co-directs the Initiative for Cryptocurrencies and Smart Contracts at Cornell. So in addition to what I just said about him working on this stuff early, he's known for having implemented the first currency that used proof of work to mint coins, which is now, of course, well established by Bitcoin. For selfish mining, which showed that that some of the claims that were made about Bitcoin and the number of people who were required to subvert the currency were actually overblown claims. For characterizing the scale and centralization of existing cryptocurrencies, which turn out to have issues, and having proposed leading protocols for on-chain and off-chain scaling. But he is proudest of his contributions not to e-currency, but to John indirectly, but to John Oliver's show on cryptocurrency. And so I have to say that of all of his accomplishments, I may envy that one the most. All right, with that, take it away, Gün.
Thank you so much, Emery, and thank you all for joining me today. I want to talk to you about the Avalanche Consensus Protocol family in general, but I actually want to take a step back at first and situate us with regard to where we are, what blockchains are, what they're supposed to do, and what function they can serve in society. For I believe that we are at the cusp of a huge, huge step where we reimagine the foundation of all financial systems. So where are we today? Well, blockchains today are a word that needs no article. We don't say a blockchain, we don't say the blockchain. Prior to closing down, if you walked around Wall Street, you would hear, you'd see two bankers walking side by side, and one of them would say, "What's your strategy for blockchain?" to the other. The only other word that I know that gets that treatment is the word God. So this thing has become something really, really huge. Today, it's a new asset class worth more than $400 billion. There are hundreds of currencies, legitimate ones. In total, if you look at any kind of a listing site, you will see maybe 6,000 currencies that are floating around out there. So this area has attracted a lot of attention, about more than $10 billion in VC money. And you might say, well, look, that's just VC money. Sometimes they invest in silly things. But there's also $20 billion of people's hard-earned money, crowdfunding, ICOs, and money that came from individuals in this space. There are interesting accomplishments if you look around. Some of these systems, in fact, many of them, have had no downtime since launch. Now think about that for a second. In the 10 years that Bitcoin has been around, how many times did AWS go down? I can count at least 4 that I saw personally. How many times did Facebook go down? And now compare that to any kind of a cryptocurrency, and at least the competent ones have never had any downtime. And it brings together really interesting people. I've been at conferences where to my left was a darknet market operator, to my right was a Bank of England stolid old gentleman representing old traditional finance. So, and one thing I do as a professor who's always afraid of getting out of touch with the young folks is look around for social markers. And if you'll go to YouTube, you'll find today that there are more songs written about Bitcoin than about Google, than about Facebook. And you might say, hey, those are just, that's just surveillance capitalism companies who would write songs about them, but also about more songs about Bitcoin than about the Free Software Foundation. So that's quite an accomplishment. These things grab people. There's something here, and we got to understand what it is. So my humble analysis of the situation is that we are witnessing the emergence of practical Byzantine fault-tolerant systems. We're seeing a new system architecture take hold. We saw, at least those of us who were around, we saw the transition from mainframes to distributed computing. We saw the transition from, again, centralized computing to client server systems. And now the time has come for a different kind of architecture and a different kind of systems to be built. These new services carry out a service without a single participant in charge. This is a huge step. It's not an evolutionary step. This is a revolutionary step. There is no single person you need to trust with your data. There is no single person you need to trust with the service. These systems nevertheless ensure strong integrity, and they provide auditability and transparency to a degree that we don't see in any other centralized service. You cannot ensure the internal operations of a trust. You cannot ensure the internal operations of Facebook today, or Google today, or Wall Street today. All of these, to the extent that they provide a guarantee to you and I, they provide that guarantee via audits. And if Wall Street is any indication, those audits uncover something every few months, and there's a scandal every few years. I'll get back to that in a second. So not only are these new systems, these practical Byzantine fault tolerant systems, are here to provide a different kind of service. Using that service, we begin to see a new family of applications. These applications, sometimes called smart contracts, sometimes called dApps for decentralized applications, they provide a level of service, once again, building on the pillars of the foundation underneath. Namely, they carry out a service according to a spec with no centralized component in charge. That in turn gives rise to high integrity systems, systems where, despite not trusting anyone, you can count on the service doing what it's supposed to do. If Emery and I are in a band and we want the money split 80-20, Emery gets the front vocals and I do the backup drums or something, we can do that without an agent. So, you know, when you're in the supermarket checkout aisle, check out how many musicians are suing their agents, and see what smart contracts can do. This is the simplest example I can give. More interestingly, there are financial instruments that we can build that are substantially better than the ones we have now because they eliminate counterparty risk. And one of the main reasons why I believe this is a really big innovation is that these new decentralized applications give rise to new ways of encoding business logic, new corporate structures, new trusts, new partnerships, where the element of trust is reduced or maybe sometimes eliminated entirely. And that is a big step. It's a big step in accountability and transparency. So that, I think, is the promise of this area. Now, my message to you today is essentially very simple. I want to simply show you what I've done, a sliver of the work that we've been carrying out, and leave you with the message that there are deep scientific contributions made and to be made in a burgeoning discipline, subdiscipline of computer science. Now, the subdiscipline touches multiple topics. It spans distributed systems, networking, cryptography, of course, game theory in quite a large amount, it turns out, program verification, programming languages, and economics. So there's a lot to be had there, and a lot of contributions to be made from people from diverse backgrounds. The second message I want to leave you with today is that the dream that I outlined in the previous slide is difficult to achieve with today's protocols. As compelling as it is, we can't get there from where we are today with today's protocols. And the third and final thing I'll try to do is I'll try to illustrate for you a new approach to consensus protocols, one that I think is revolutionary, one that I think represents the third biggest step of its kind in 45 years of research in the distributed systems area. So, and then I think it's inevitable given these 3 points that the sort of deduction here is these system construction techniques are useful and will be with us forever. And it doesn't matter if the cryptocurrencies, some of them fail, if all of them fail. There's something intellectually interesting here that I hope some of you will find compelling. So let me, before I go ahead and dive into the depths of this new consensus protocol, let me sort of take you on a journey through time about how we keep track of records, okay? The predominant way in which we keep track of records is we find somebody we can trust. Here is the good old Bank of England. And if you trust them with your money, then you are good, except they do have a habit of usurping your funds every now and then for all kinds of reasons. I put up Bank of England because it's well established. I really wanted to put up my own bank in upstate New York. And I'm not sure if anybody's banking experience is at all similar to mine, but they do usurp your money. That's their business model, is usurping your money for frivolous reasons. Now, of course, if the banking thing does not resonate with you, let me put this up. As computer geeks, we typically interact with this particular company. This is also a record-keeping company. They keep track of a one-line record in a simple database that says Sirer.com belongs to me right here. And that's what they're supposed to do. And for that privilege, they charge me about $12 per year. That is usury. That is insanely higher than the amount of whatever it costs them to maintain that record. So this points another factoid about the way our financial services are structured. Gatekeepers who bring very little value into the equation extract enormous rents, and it's time to kick them out. Then, of course, there's Wall Street. You might say, look, yeah, okay, you're going to show us some techie stuff. You're trying to set the stage here. But you know what? Wall Street works just fine. And I'm here to tell you that it doesn't work just fine. And let me illustrate with a very simple example from about 4 years ago or so, maybe 5 years ago. And you can look this up. It is not very well published. So you will find that the press reports about this were not front page news. They were buried. I'm referring to the case of Dole Fruit Company. This is a very big fruit importing company. And for various technical reasons, regulatory reasons, they needed to tally up the number of shares they had outstanding. The company had issued 38 million shares. And so they wanted to see who had those shares because they were about to run a vote. And when they did so, they discovered that there were 53 million claims to 53 million shares for a company that had issued 38 million of them. So now think about what that would have done to the stock price of the Dole company. Wall Street was incapable of keeping track of a simple summation. They couldn't keep track of the number of shares of a company traded on their services. So that's where we are. You can trust them, and sure, and you can say they work, and we can close our eyes and ears, but there is plenty of evidence that the system as we have it now, based on trust and post-facto audits, is insufficient for today's needs. Now, this wasn't always so. We didn't always rely on some person with an Excel spreadsheet to keep our records. For the longest time, we kept track of records, especially records of wealth, using property. Now, this is, how I was brought up, growing up in Istanbul. It's, the shimmer of gold always gives me like this notion that this thing must be valuable. What's going on here is we got to pick something that people cannot fake, that cannot be created out of the thin air. And we have to use that, or we get to use that as an indication of wealth, because it's impossible to just create some of this, or it's not impossible. It's very difficult to create this easily. You really have to go through some effort to get your hands on some. Now, every culture has their own way of keeping track of precious resources. To a Pacific Islander, these seashells would invoke the same reaction as the gold invokes in me and quite a few other people who grew up with gold as a store of value. And so other cultures, like this is the Chinese knife money from several thousand years ago. To them, this was incredibly valuable because forging a knife was actually a very, very specialized skill at the time. And but what I want to tell you about today has to do with these rye stones on the island of Yap. This is a Pacific island. And the reason why they use these ginormous stones for money is because this island lacked big stones. You couldn't manufacture a big stone. To manufacture a big stone, you would have to go to the island over, which is volcanic. There they have big stones. You'd have to carve out your stone. You'd carry it, kind of like these guys are doing. And then you'd bring it back to your island. And then you would do with your money what everybody does with their money, which is display it lavishly for everyone to see. And so you get this bling in front of people's houses. And if I have 5 of these stones, I could be like, hey, Emery, I want to come over and buy your plot of land for 3 of these stones. And Emery would say, sure, roll them over to my side, and you've got the land, and now he's got my stones, and I've got his land. We've got a good transaction. There was a fascinating story that took place in 1863 on this island that was well documented by a British archaeologist, which is on the way back to the island from one of these stone carving expeditions. You can call it a money-making expedition. The folks bringing the stone back had a capsize of their boat, and they dropped the stone in the ocean. Now they go back to their village and they say, look, we're honest people. We carved this stone out. We worked really hard. We worked hard, just as hard as everybody else who brought their stone back. But on the transfer over, we had a mishap. What say you, dear elders, to our plight? Could we possibly count this stone that is at the bottom of the ocean? And the village elders thought about this, and they said, you know what? From now on, you can actually count that stone as a real coin. So from that moment on, I could say, hey, Emery, I'm going to get your plot of land. I'll give you the 2 stones in front of my house. Plus, I own the stone in the bottom of the ocean. You can have that one too. As long as you all, the entirety of the village, agree that the transaction took place, that I paid Emery, that all of you agree, and that none of you thinks that I also paid somebody else at the same time with that same stone, then this is a safe way to transact. That coin over there is a form of virtual money. And just in case you might think, well, this is a made up story, it sounds too perfect to be true, someone went and found that stone. So here it is lying at the bottom of the ocean, serving its function as virtual money. So what virtual currencies will try to do is essentially establish a globally consistent log of ownership of rare resources. So Alice gives Bob here 10 Bitcoins, and we will keep track of some kind of a ledger. Bob gives those 10 Bitcoins to Charlie, and Charlie gives 5 of those to David. The big question is, how are we going to keep tabs on this globally consistent log? We need to ensure that all correct nodes that are participating in the system get to see the same balances for the same principles. So 40 plus years of research has yielded 2 major families of consensus protocols. One we call classical. These are based on the foundational work of Leslie Lamport and Barbara Liskov. And these are used in today's permission systems. And I'm sure you've heard many, many talks about how they work, but I'll go over that very quickly right now. And an alternative emerged to this in 2009. Someone under the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto came up with an alternative protocol. It's got different properties. It's synchronous, it's probabilistic, but it's good enough for use in these high value financial systems. It's in fact better than classical because it's more robust in many ways, but it's got some other downsides as well. So I want to go over how these work, and I want to introduce the 3rd biggest breakthrough in this space that took place about 2 years ago, and that is the Avalanche protocol. So how does classical consensus work? As the very first paper in this space makes amply clear, this is the easiest analogy is to a parliament. So the goal here is to pass a decree, and the decree is going to be either Alice pays Bob or Alice pays Charlie. We want to ensure that Alice does not double spend the cash that she has. We want to make sure that she uses one coin only once. And so typically how these protocols work is fairly simple. We get to have a parliament of deciders, whoever they might be. And for reasons I'm going to get to later, this typically is a number that's very, very small, on the order of about 100. And so, for example, an example might be here, thou shalt exit the EU. And so we want to pass this law, and we want to make sure that everybody sticks by it. We don't want anybody getting confused about this situation. And the protocols in this space all work via quorum intersection. So you need to master 2 little tricks. And if you do that, you will be a BFT expert circa 2018. You can go to all of the OSDI, SOSP type conferences and pass muster just by knowing these two tricks I'm about to tell you. Trick number one is when you do a write, you have to do a write to a supermajority, this blue area. So you have to tell at least an area that big, a number of people that big, that something happened. If you can get them to agree, then when you read, you have to read from a read quorum, again, of a particular size. This particular size is 2/3 plus 1. So if the blue area is 2/3 plus 1, and the yellow area from which a quorum reads is 2/3 plus 1, then you will have an intersection. And that intersection is guaranteed to be, and this is the pigeonhole principle. Now you're going to have to use a little bit of a proof by contradiction in making your safety argument, that this area will have to contain 1/3 plus 1 people. And so that means that even if 1/3 of your parliament is entirely Byzantine, they are out to lie to you. They're out to tell one side that, yes, we agree that we are exiting the EU. They tell the other side, no, we did not agree that we exit the EU. Even if all of them were liars, there is guaranteed to be this one lone person here who is not going to be willing to go along with that ruse. And therefore, the reader will be notified of the right of the previous person. It's as simple as that. And once you master that, you are halfway to being a BFT expert. The second half of these protocols is ensuring that every single participant goes through the same process. So you cannot rely on the say-so of any individual. You have to somehow make sure that every single participant independently for themselves establishes the size of the quorum intersection. If you can master these two tricks, 2018 BFT conferences are calling for you. And there's been hundreds of papers on classical consensus. So there are many, many, many good ideas here that people have expanded on. There are nice features with this approach. It provides a probability 1 guarantee. What does that mean? Well, that means that, it's probability 1. There are no doubts in anyone's mind. As long as the preconditions are met, the postcondition is yes, the safety is maintained. There are a couple of issues with it, though. One of the problems is, to be efficient, these protocols utilize a leader. That leader becomes both a bottleneck and a vulnerability. The communication also does not scale well. Most protocols in this space require O(n)² communication. And one of the killer points with these approaches is that everybody in the parliament must agree on membership. We all have to know who to ask. If I write to a quorum of 67 people out of 100, and Emery reads from a quorum of 67 people from 100, but his 100 is not exactly the same as my 100. He caught the parliament exactly on January 21st, as new people are coming in and old people are going out. Then we have an issue. And therefore, the view change operations are complicated. And because of the n² amount of information that typically needs to be exchanged, these parliaments cannot be big. The best protocol in this space is one that is first authored by one of my students. He invented it with Dalia Malki and others while on a summer trip to the West Coast. And it is the protocol used in the Libra system from Facebook. And even that system is not expected to scale beyond 100 validators. Today, it's just 28 close friends of Mark Zuckerberg. So these protocols are great in the sense that they're efficient and they're quiescent. They give you relatively fast responses, but they don't scale in the number of participants. And they're very fragile, especially around view changes. And that's the reason why when Satoshi came onto the scene, and he wanted to build a new kind of currency, he decided to avoid the entirety of classical consensus family. He thought, to build an open protocol, the system needs to be open to participation, and it needs to be robust to changes in view. So he came up with a different approach to consensus. And his idea is slightly different. So it works like this. There's a genesis vertex on the left right here, a genesis block on the left right here. And people gossip their transactions. Alice pays Bob, Bob pays Charlie, And special nodes, known as miners, collate these transactions into blocks, and they want to add these blocks, kind of like adding pages to the end of a book. Now, if we let people do that willy-nilly, there'd be so many books, we wouldn't know which book is correct. And so he decided to introduce another concept known as a proof of work puzzle. So you have to solve a special cryptographic puzzle to be able to say this is a legitimate page. And the difficulty of this puzzle is adjusted so that these blocks can be produced globally at a rate of 1 every epoch units. Typically for Bitcoin, that epoch unit is 10 minutes. So one of these blocks is being produced every 10 minutes. There's some self-adjusting process that takes place. If the puzzles are being produced more frequently, the puzzle difficulty goes up. If less frequently, then the puzzle difficulty goes down, so as to ensure that these additions are made in an orderly fashion. To provide incentive for people to solve all these crypto puzzles, what Satoshi did is he said, look, the very first transaction on any block can confer you the right to create some coins for yourself. So these transactions over here, right here for miners, are saying, look, I'm going to record this fact and I myself will make some money myself. And in this case, it's rewarding 50 Bitcoins to the early miners of Bitcoin. Now, if you want to go and do a double spend, what you will have to do is you will have to go back in time, like over here. There was, Gün pays Emre so much for his plot of land. I want to undo this. I want to change what happens here. Well, to do that, I have to invent another block. And it has to have a valid proof of work. And while I'm inventing that block with an alternative financial history, while I'm trying to rewrite what happened in the universe, other people are extending this main chain. And therefore, it is not feasible for me. It's incredibly unlikely. It's possible if I get super lucky, but it's incredibly unlikely that me, with my hashing resources, will be able to build a chain longer than the one that's on top here being built by everybody else. And so therein lies the security argument that Satoshi made. My work with Itai later showed that this argument is flawed, and there are tricks you can do. And really what you need is not just a majority, to be honest. You need a super majority, about 67% of Nakamoto participants, to be honest. But I won't get into that today. Let's just take it at face value the way Satoshi said it, and just observe that this is a legitimate protocol. It's probabilistic. It changes the game on consensus protocols. But the probability with which the blockchain can be rewritten drops exponentially the longer this suffix is, such that transactions that are really buried, say 6 blocks or more, are incredibly unlikely to be overwritten by an adversary that has 30% or less hash power, 33% or less hash power. So that's where we are. And there are a couple of loose ends. Shall I get into this? There's no need. I'm going to skip the loose ends here. There's a minting schedule that Satoshi committed to on day 0. And the block rewards change over time so as to make sure that there's a hard cap of 21 million coins. The puzzle difficulty is adjusted, I mentioned this, and there's a block size trade-off that I'm not going to get into. So this gave rise to an interesting arms race. People started mining on CPUs, and they were making 50 Bitcoins per block discovered. They quickly switched over to FPUs and GPUs. If you tried to buy a GPU because you were a gamer in the 2013, 14 timeframe, and you noticed how expensive they were, that's the reason why. Everybody was buying GPUs for Bitcoin mining. People switched to programmable devices, later to ASICs. This is somebody's home setup. I think this is somebody's dorm setup. And there are really funny stories from CMU actually, where they were renovating their lab, and they've got a proper machine room, and they were getting rid of it. And when they lifted the floor tiles to redo the machine room, they discovered a secondary lab underneath their actual lab, where people were, apparently grad students, I guess, were doing Bitcoin mining underneath the floorboards using the free electricity. The New York Times had a nice write-up on the mining industry. This is China back in the day. This is yet another miner. This is a mining installation on fire because all of these things are typically fly-by-night operations. All of these devices are doing nothing useful. They're solving crypto puzzles. That crypto puzzle solving is doing no work whatsoever other than solving a pre-image of a hash whose result is below a difficulty number. That is, these guys are just wasting electricity just so that the timing of the blocks is right. But the rewards are big and the risks are worth it. And here, this is the kind of result. Here's I think this is Estonia. There's a big farm in Estonia. This is a modern farm in China. This is oil immersed miners. What's the end result? Well, the end result is that this process consumes immense amounts of energy for keeping track of an append-only log. It's on par with Austria, 2 Denmarks, 3 Irelands, 4 nuclear power plants worth of energy. A few percent of the world's energy supply is going into crypto mining today. 1 to 2% is the latest estimate, and that's at least a year old. The sad thing is there's no connection between energy burned and the value of the coin. The energy you burn doesn't establish a price floor. It's an environmental disaster. It leaks value out of the system to power companies. Bitcoin pays about $4 to $5 billion to miners every year. And it shrinks the feasible envelope for the coins. If the price of Bitcoin drops below a certain value, then there will be very little incentive for these miners to continue mining. The block intervals will disperse so much that the system might not be able to react and have a chance to lower the block difficulty. So just to recap, these systems based on Nakamoto are inherently limited by the consensus protocol in their performance. Bitcoin's throughput is, let's say, at best 7 transactions per second. This bridge is in front of me in New York City. They do about 7 transactions per second. So if we just convert those bridges to use Bitcoin, that will take up all of Bitcoin's layer 1 capacity. Worse, the latency is about 60 minutes. Secure latency is about 60 minutes. You buy a cup of coffee, you have to wait at the coffee store for 60 minutes. You can tweak things, you can tweak parameters, but that comes at a cost of decentralization. So Ethereum has pushed the envelope. It gets 15 transactions per second. Latency is about 30 minutes for secure transactions, but already it has far fewer miners. At least it did when I did the big decentralization study. And so worst of all, why are we doing all this? Well, we're doing all this to not trust a single entity, but what's the kind of decentralization we're getting? Well, we did this big study, 2-year longitudinal study of Bitcoin and Ethereum, and we're talking about 24 mining pools doing this. So to get to 24 nodes of participation, we're doing an immense amount of damage to the environment. So, and in fact, this is also a security problem. If the top 3 or 4 miners collude, then they can actually rewrite the financial history of the world. So that's not at all a good situation to be in. Okay, so let's move on. I mentioned that classical has a bunch of nice features like quick finality, but doesn't scale. And Nakamoto consensus is very robust. I can join, you can join, and so on. Of course, as long as you have the mining rigs and access to free electricity or cheap electricity, you can join. But it's high latency, low throughput, does not scale, wastes energy. So it's time to rethink the entirety of consensus protocols and come up with a new approach. I want to talk to you about this new protocol family called the Avalanche family. It takes an entirely new approach to consensus. It's going to achieve a couple of properties, and I'll show you how and why. These properties center around quick finality, high throughput. So quick finality is about a second or faster is what we are seeing on our current mainnet today. In fact, what we're really seeing is with 600 validators today, the system is capable of making decisions in about 300 milliseconds. That's like a slow eye blink is how long it takes for it to do a global consensus round with 600 nodes participating. I never thought when I was in grad school that I would see the days when 600 people could participate in a consensus round. It's not possible with classical. It has very high throughput, so 5 digits are definitely possible. It scales very well from 10,000 to maybe 10 million nodes. It's robust. There is no need for precise membership. It's quiescent, green, and sustainable. The approach is very, very different in its communication pattern from everything you're used to. The security guarantees are very different. The correctness proofs are also very different. They come from a different line of work. They're very much math-based and Markovian analysis-based, as opposed to the kinds of things that we are used to in BFT systems. The core idea, the core insight is as follows. It's to view a distributed system as a physical system consisting of independent particles interacting with others, and then to design a protocol that seeks to efficiently settle into a low energy state. So I've been doing this for some time with distributed protocols, at least mentally and internally, but with Avalanche, the way to think of it is there is an energy gradient in the network, and it's such that it tends to settle. The nodes tend to settle into a state where everybody believes the same thing, and in that state they're very stable. And it takes a lot of jostling to take it back up the hill and into a different state. So once you do that and you ensure that these low energy states correspond to desired outcomes, then you have the insight for a protocol that is not going to stay stably at an intermediate unwanted state. It'll settle down into one of the states that you like it to be in. So this is sort of a meta idea, and it's got the name metastability. So let me try to illustrate this. Imagine a network, and on the x-axis, I'm showing you this, let's see, this is the 0 point. So 0 nodes believe, let's see, this is the 50-50 point. Half the nodes believe that Alice paid Bob, green, or Alice paid Charlie, blue. So it's blue, green, 50-50. This is 100% of the nodes believe that, that Alice paid Bob. 100% of the nodes believe that Alice paid Charlie. So we're going to build, so in the very middle, we have the fully bivalent state. When the network is in this mode where like 50% of the nodes believe blue, 50% believe green, this outcome is equally likely to yield a result that's on the left or the right. So now Bob and Charlie don't have a vested interest in how the outcome happens. Bob just wants to hear, hey, you got paid. And if he hears that, he wants to ensure that Charlie doesn't ever hear that he got paid. Charlie hears that transaction was declined. So we want the system to go fully in one direction. Nobody cares in which direction it goes. We just need to make sure that this system will topple over to a decision. So if you think about what's going to happen, I'm going to outline for you how this protocol works. And the way it's going to work is by repeated rounds. Whereas classical protocols worked by fully sampling the entirety of the parliament, and it had to be a small parliament as a result, and everybody had to do the sampling. This protocol will work by repeated subsampling. So every node will pick a very small number of his peers, see which way they're inclined towards, will adjust his own opinion accordingly, and the system will go in some direction or another. My go-to analogy for this is a giant super stadium, so Maracaibo Stadium, 100,000 people. And we all come in. Initially, we get Delta card, and half the people believe green, half the people believe blue. So we need to come up with a protocol that's going to make sure that, that we come up with a decision that is uniform for all. Now, the following protocol is dirt simple, and let's see where it leads us to in terms of intuition. Suppose I ask 3 people or 5 people in the audience. I don't have to know everybody in the stadium. Memory doesn't know everybody. We don't have to be precise in our knowledge, but we have to have some sufficient overlap that is well characterized in the paper. So we just pick 3 people at random, and I say, yo, what color do you currently prefer? And the results come back. And depending on the results, if the results favor green, I flip green. If the results favor blue, I flip blue. You can see that there is a chance that if I start right at the very top, after one round of me doing this and everybody else doing this, we could still remain here. There's a chance. It's possible. But if so, then there's going to be the next round and the next round. And at each round, it's less and less and exponentially less likely that we will stay immediately here. More than likely, because of random variations, we will oversample the greens or the blues. Now, when we do that, we will slightly veer towards the side. There will be slightly more greens than blues. Let's say we were 50-50 and we did some sampling, and by chance, more of us sampled the green nodes than blue, and we moved a little bit towards green, towards 51% green. The next round, we're more likely to go to this side, to my right on the screen, than to go to the left. How much more likely? 51%. And if we do go that way, then we're going to be at something like 53%. And now you can do the math. And you can see that we're slowly descending down a gradient. And there is going to be a point of phase shift where we're going to go descending down this hill very, very quickly. And then there's another point that we call the point of no return, beyond which it is safe to commit. There are so many people who believe green that you can start actually committing green, secure in the knowledge that, that this weight of people who currently prefer green will pull everybody else to the green side. So this is the pictorial representation of this thing. So here we've got this node asking 5 people, and you know, because the answers come back green, he turns green. This node is asking a bunch of, let's see, a bunch of 3 greens and 2 blues, he turns green, and so on. He can, on the next round, he's going to ask other people, he can flip back to blue and so on. He's going to do his thing, but ultimately, this thing will slowly build weight and then suddenly converge to a unanimous decision. So if you look at it graphically, this is typically what you get to see. So now let me help you navigate the paper. The full details are of course in the paper, and they're kind of mathematically complicated. So I'm going to give you just intuitions here. And just to orient you, there are 4 different members of this consensus protocol family. There is one called slush, and that's the one I just outlined. It's not Byzantine fault tolerant. What I outlined for you was very simple. It has no memory. Every time you sample, you flip to the majority. And it turns out that it's perfectly good for consensus protocol usage in a non-Byzantine environment. There's a variant of the protocol called Snowflake. It's Byzantine fault tolerant. It's very simple. It's useful for analysis. There's another one called Snowball. That's the one we use in the ultimate Avalanche implementation. It's much stronger against Byzantine adversaries. And finally, there is the Avalanche protocol. So there are 2 different, so we both use both Snowball and Avalanche. It's an implementation trick. It does a whole bunch of things to take advantage of the unique features of a cryptocurrency environment. It builds an efficient multi-degree DAG-based ledger for digital currencies. I'll talk about them very, very briefly. The protocols are dirt simple. So it's just essentially you start in an undecided state, you sample some number of people, some small number K, and depending on how the responses come in, you flip your color to whatever the supermajority of responses were from the 3 or 5 or 10, however many, but typically a small number of people that you sampled. And every time that happens, you increment a count, and if that count is over this threshold beta, you accept. Now, there's one theorem that is very, very interesting, comes from Markovian analysis, that says that these systems reach consensus in a finite number of rounds. That's very nice to know. Further, expected number of rounds is O of log n, kind of like gossip networks. Sample size K is optimally small. And so you want to you can keep it as small as 3 or 5, actually, it turns out. Now, just to give you a slight insight into the differences between the protocols, in the Snowflake protocol, that's easy to analyze. Every time I subsample 5 nodes and they're green, I flip my color to green if I were blue. In the Snowball protocol, we actually keep some notion of history. And we have a confidence value called D, and that's incremented. So every now and then I might sample the opposing color, but it doesn't necessarily flip me until my confidence is eroded in my current choice. So I occasionally might sample a Byzantine cluster. I sample 3 people, they all turn out to be Byzantine. Well then, that's not a big deal for Snowball. It would flip Snowflake, and therefore Snowflake takes longer to converge. The beta threshold is far higher for Snowflake, but it's much lower for Snowball because a bad sample on occasion doesn't necessarily flip its opinion. To show you this pictorially, so here's a set of samples. This is a node that's sampling, again, Alice space Bob, Alice space Charlie. And every time, Every time this node does a sample is shown here. So he samples blue, he samples green here. These are Byzantine guys. We're going to assume for analysis that the Byzantine nodes have full insight into what's going on in the network, and they're doing whatever they optimally can to cause the greatest amount of havoc. In reality, the Byzantine nodes don't know what other nodes you're sampling, so they cannot be this efficient or this good at what they do. But we're assuming the worst case scenarios here. So this would cause a flip, this would cause another flip, then blue would build, but then we missample a bunch of greens here, a bunch of Byzantines, and we flip again. So this is a snowflake, and it cannot decide with just this series of samples. But in this case, in this column over here, I'm showing you snowball. In snowball, these flips cause confidence to be eroded, but not sufficiently. And in the long term, they don't actually have that much of an effect, and a node can decide far earlier. So to go from this to a cryptocurrency implementation, there are a couple of things that we need to do. We can't possibly make, we can, but it would be inefficient to run a single decree protocol repeatedly and independently for every decision. So you might remember the Lamport series of papers. They start out with a single decree protocol, they go on to the multi-decree protocol, and over like a decade or a decade and a half, there's a series of improvements that, that add efficiency to the consensus decisions. Well, here in this one paper, the given protocols actually go through that transition. And here what's happening is there's a genesis vertex. And what we want to do is we want to make decisions concurrently. We want to entangle the fates of decisions with each other so that a given vote, a given vote for one of a conflicting set of transactions, so Alice pays Bob or Alice pays Charlie, these votes can count not just for themselves, but for everything in the ancestry set of a node. So in particular, if we just have this, a genesis vertex and Alice pays Bob, Alice pays Charlie, we're in the situation as before. There's nothing different. But take a look at these transactions over here. So so B pays G, D pays E, C pays F, and then we have another conflict set. D is paying Z and D is paying Y. So in this case, let's assume that so D has like 5 coins. He's giving 1 to E, and then 4 to Z and 4 to Y. So these two cannot concurrently exist with each other. So there are decisions to be made. And in the Avalanche approach, every single vote for this vertex is also a vote for that vertex, his parent, and that vertex, his parent. So we don't need to repeatedly sample these two transactions, this conflict set, to make a decision here. We don't have to independently achieve a decision here before we go on to the next one. We can decide on one of these two and transitively decide on the entirety path of the ancestry. We will also have to, of course, decide on this one, and we will have to reject this one. Nobody should actually, nobody honest will vote for this guy because his ancestor is right here in the conflict set. And the preferred path here is this particular one that I'm showing, and I'm hoping that you can see my cursor, mouse cursor. This suddenly changes the game to expected overhead of O of 1 per decision. So it's a very, very nice trick, and the DAG structure allows us to concurrently grow the DAG at multiple tips and efficiently vote on huge sets of transactions all at the same time. So so this is, this DAG structure provides failure isolation. And as I mentioned, these decided and spent transactions can be pruned from the graph. I'm not going to get into these details. These are sort of implementation details. So where does that leave us? Well, the math and analysis show that for even very large networks, the number of rounds required is very, very small. So for 10,000 nodes, with every node polling 10 nodes, less than 17 rounds suffices. If I were to use any classical protocol, then I would, a node would have to sample 10,000 other nodes. The leader would certainly have to do that. And the amount of messages, the bits that have to come back is also typically going to be very large. In contrast, in Avalanche, a node has to sample only 10 nodes less than 17 times. So 170 messages to achieve per node to achieve consensus among 10,000 participants. It's utterly doable, and we've been able to run consensus protocols with 2,000 actual nodes. That is, I believe, the record number ever. So I'm not going to talk about selecting parameters. The system is quite robust to parameter selection. It provides very strong immutability. So there are 10,000 10,000 or more direct participants in Avalanche. That's possible by protocol. Bitcoin, Ethereum, EOS, Casper, etc., ETH2O. Those kinds of protocols are all inherently limited because they're based on a different, older architecture. There are a couple of interesting things as well. I'll make it very quick. We can tolerate a large fraction of Byzantine participants, and we can even guarantee safety. And this is a really surprising result for me. We can guarantee safety even when more than half the nodes are Byzantine. Now, we can't guarantee liveness when you've got so many evil people, but we can guarantee safety. And a corollary to this is we get graceful degradation of security as the Byzantine component increases. So with classical protocols, I'm sure you've seen these talks, there's an assumption that less than 1/3 of the nodes are evil. And as long as 34% of the nodes are evil, your system is screwed up. They will cause a safety violation. They know this too. The attacker knows exactly when he will succeed. In contrast, in Avalanche, the system guarantees that, with the chosen parameters, safety properties are going to be held. Mean time between failures is expected to be, let's say, 20,000 years, as long as the Byzantine component is less than 30%. Whatever it is that it's parameterizable. You pick the numbers, and the paper provides the paper selection criteria, the parameter selection criteria. Now, suppose the attacker is 31% or even 40%. That doesn't mean he's going to win. It means your security guarantee went out the door. It's not going to be 20,000 years to attack or win anymore, but it'll be, I don't know, 5,000 years or 2,000 years. And for him to guarantee, close to guarantee win, he has to actually acquire a huge percent of the voting power inside the network. And to do that, typically, he's going to have to acquire an enormous amount of the stake in the network, of the coins in the network with which the voting is done. And so this is the attacker's the probability of a safety violation in Avalanche for a 1,000 node network. You can see what happens after 667. The safety guarantee starts deteriorating, but in this range it's close to zero. Now, this is not as good as classical. It is not zero, but it's pretty darn close to zero, and well, we know from Bitcoin that 1 minus epsilon is about as good as 1. You can make that epsilon as small as you like, and keep in mind that the devices that you're using, like this device for signing transactions and so forth, are also probabilistic devices. Hardware is not perfect. That device has a pretty small chance, but nevertheless a positive chance of actually mis-signing a transaction and forever making your coins inaccessible to you. So we've got faulty components underneath, and so 1 minus epsilon can be made less than the probability of a fault on the hardware side. So let's see, and classical protocols break down completely when Byzantine nodes exceed threshold. Now, we cannot guarantee liveness, as I said, so I don't want anybody getting the mistaken understanding there that we can do something magic about liveness. So, so this is a different way of showing that same graph. But let's not go into this. Let me just wrap up here. There are other things that we added to the system. So of course, one of the things is, how do you make sure that the same evil Byzantine person is not joining the system and voting under the guise of a million other entities? So we do that by using proof of stake. So we simply require that you tie down some coins. Coins are rare, and so the attacker has as much representation in the system as he's got coins. As long as he doesn't have a huge portion of the coins in the system, he cannot attack. And if he has a huge portion of the coins in the system, he hopefully will have spent so much that the attack is economically nonsensical for him. So there are other cool things in this system. I should say something about the flexibility. The ultimate system that we built supports multiple virtual machines on top. So you can write different scripting languages for defining different kinds of transactions. Real estate transactions obey different rules. Adjoining plots can be merged or split. Gold obeys different rules. Money obeys very simple fungibility rules. So you can express any and all of these using whatever language you like with Avalanche. Key parameters that other systems have to bake in can be dynamically adjusted. So one of the key things in Bitcoin is the entirety of the economic future of the system was encoded by Satoshi. And that's one of the reasons why, if you're a Bitcoin supporter, you have to revere Satoshi. It's part of the ethos because he baked in for eternity exactly what your economic future is going to be. He must be God to you. And in fact, if you look at the discussions online, you will see that he's revered as God. In Avalanche, we pick a people first attitude, and it is the coin holders that can dynamically change certain key economic parameters depending on dynamic economic conditions, macro conditions. So for those of you into math, take a look at the paper. There's very interesting and very different sets of proofs, very different analysis techniques in Avalanche than what you are typically used to with classical protocols. I'm going to just show you these graphs. Like these are all, I put two here, just to have like some breathing room. The current system is achieving decisions in less than a second. This is Bitcoin's latency, about an hour. This is Ethereum's for equally secure transactions. They have more frequent blocks. This is Algorand, and that's best from Silvio Micali. This is the Avalanche system from us. Throughput is very, very fast. This is 7 transactions per second for Bitcoin, 7,200 for us. And that's a lot faster, 3 or 4 times faster than Visa, while being decentralized to hundreds of nodes. And so that brings me to the end of my talk. So needless to say, I believe that the Avalanche family produces an exciting new class of consensus protocols. They're robust, they're efficient, they're based on an entirely different intellectual foundation, an entirely different messaging architecture. We can now truly build, truly large, practical Byzantine fault-tolerant systems. And we've added additional features and innovated at levels other than the consensus protocol as well. But given that this is a systems-oriented audience, I wanted to focus on the consensus protocol side of things. If you are interested, please take a look at the accompanying papers. I believe that there's a very exciting future ahead where there's a giant meteor in the sky called blockchain. It's coming to hit Wall Street right in front of me over here. And these new protocols will give us the tools we need for building decentralized financial contracts that are secure, auditable, and transparent. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. That was super interesting. I really love the whole approach of making it probabilistic and this kind of like semi-epidemic, not epidemic exactly, but this like probabilistic. What do I want to say? You said it better than I did, but just the notion that over time you quickly are going to converge onto your decision simply by virtue of probability.
Yeah.
And that's a really beautiful thing. So let's see. So people who are out there on Slack, feel free to pose questions. While we're waiting for those to come in, I would love to hear a little backstory about how things are going with Ava Labs. How'd you get started in that? Like, how did you decide, you wanted to go the startup route?
Yeah, sure.
And battle stories, whatever you got.
Of course. So I've been paying attention to the crypto space. It started out just out of curiosity. We started looking at the Bitcoin protocol. Itai and I found some really interesting, problems with the Nakamoto protocol. But then the area started to grab my attention and started playing more and more of a role in it. And at some point I got fed up because there was so much disinformation, misinformation, misconceptions out there. And And so it became so hard to try to correct other people's thinking. They believed also all the database area in general, data management area, the distributed systems area has done a very poor job of communicating research results. And there are some research results that are incorrect that we haven't bothered to correct among ourselves yet. So as a result, it got very frustrating to try to talk to practitioners. And I thought, look, the only way to change the world is to go out there and do it myself, because I can't rely on other people to do it effectively. About a year and a half ago, I got funding from a bunch of Silicon Valley bigwigs like Andreessen Horowitz. We started out with a very small team from Cornell University. We were about 6 people or so initially, based in Ithaca. Then we came down to Williamsburg, where I am now. The company now is about 70 people, and we have been growing pretty fast. We've been delivering very fast. And I'm really excited, Emery, about all the kinds of things that we can do by bringing what we know from academics into this area. And it does require a multi-disciplinary approach. So at this level, exposed in this talk, it's all distributed systems. But the layers above get into game theory. The layers above that get into program verification immediately. And there are so many colorful stories of people losing $53 million to programmability hacks, or program hacks, smart contract hacks, of people losing, that's just a Tuesday afternoon, of people attracting $1 billion or more, essentially overnight. So we've had quite a bit of a success. The amount of value in the system is about $1.3 billion right now in Avalanche. And it's been a lot of fun. I have learned a lot about Wall Street, about finance. And it's been great growing the company. It's been great, doing a bunch of cutting edge research and deploying it in real time in industry at the same time.
That's super exciting. So I had no idea it was so big already. 1 billion. It's what's a few zeros among friends? That's a lot of money.
We have
yeah. So let me ask you this. So let's see. Can you talk a little bit about the smart contracts and what kind of innovations you all are doing in that space?
Certainly. So throughout this talk, I talked about a very simple kind of a transaction. Alice pays somebody. Alice pays Bob or Charlie. But that corresponds to everybody's basic understanding of their interaction with the bank, which has been the same since 1935 or whatever, which is you write a check. Using some banks, you can write a very fancy check that is post-dated. That's about the level of innovation in retail banking. It hasn't changed in about 100 years. So smart contracts are programmable code snippets that direct money flows. So you and I can agree to a certain contract, which is really a program that will direct how the money is paid out. So I alluded to one example, which is a simple manager contract for a rock band. Money comes in, it gets split up 80-20, and there is no possibility of the middleman taking a cut. But a simpler one might be, or different one might be, that you and I agree to a game of chess whose rules are encoded in the contract, and you and I play it on a blockchain, and the winner takes the purse. So if I checkmate you, then I get all of the purse. So it's an enormous simplification of many kinds of disputes encountered in real life contract disputes. So true believers will oversell. So I want to be careful here, and I say, look, there are all sorts of, law is law. Law is not going away. And this is not going to eliminate human conflict. It's not going to eliminate wars. Once you start scratching the blockchain surface, you see a lot of people making crazy claims. I'm not saying that, but it does eliminate a large class of basic disputes because it eliminates programmatically any possibility of misbehavior. It also provides transparency. So if a charity is run according to a smart contract, you know exactly how much they're going to pay out. You do not need an audit after the fact. And this is pretty critical. So we do not get this level of transparency for most financial organizations, and with smart contracts we do. So that's one of the reasons why I believe they will be transformative for society. So governments run by smart contract are hampered in what they can do. You know what the government will do on your behalf. Companies, charities, trusts, you know by construction what they're able to do. I can go on and on, but let me just end on one note, which is program verification is absolutely essential to get any of these guarantees. So normally this is just a block of code. And what you really want is that block of code to provide a guarantee that is understandable to the user. So the user can say, aha, I understand what will happen to my money as I interact with this thing. And we're not there yet. There are smart contract hacks on a weekly basis now. And sums of money being lost is like, $5 million, nobody even blinks an eye. That's chump change. And 30s, 50s, that happens very, very frequently. Every 6 months, there's something that causes enormous failures in this space. So it's really fun. There's a purse waiting for everybody with a good program verifier. There's a bounty. It's in the many millions range. So I encourage everybody in the programming languages space to take a look at this burgeoning space. It's really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think at least one is on the call right now, I believe. So Giannis Markdakas has been working on this topic, especially verifying correctness of Ethereum smart contracts. So can you talk briefly about any technical distinctions between the smart contracts you all have done and how Ethereum works?
Sure. So the way we built the Avalanche protocol is as a network of networks. So it's incredibly flexible. Think of it as a consensus engine that is agnostic to the scripting languages that run on top. So you can run multiple virtual machines on top. We have one called the Ava virtual machine. It's the basic, most simplest virtual machine you can imagine. It facilitates asset transfers. But we also support the EVM in its entirety, all of it. And we're byte by byte compatible. So everything that works on the EVM works on Avalanche's contract chain, and it works exactly the same, except much faster and much cheaper. And we have works in the way, and we have efforts in the works to add additional VM functionality. We're working on WASM. And we have an initial prototype where we can execute WASM code in this universe and provide, once again, fast execution for code that compiles down to WASM. So we're capable of supporting more than these 3 virtual machines. And I am personally very interested in anything that compiles Solidity down to a sane, safe virtual machine. Now, EVM is not sane. Just about every micro decision in it is a bad decision, starting with the sizes of integers that will drive you nuts, 256 bits, to just about every other micro decision involving the management of state. WASM is not sane. For those of you who looked into it, once again, the basic types are crazy. This is not a VM that sane people should be using. So there is an enormous space there, at least I can identify as an academic, of a VM that is embeddable, small, portable, safe, of course, and is generally sane to use, that other people can use as a compilation target. So that's my quick rundown of what we do that's different. We support multiple VMs, and I believe that the space has a hunger for actual VMs that are suitable for this area.
Yeah, thanks. That was okay. So my head exploded when you said WASM. Have to say, yeah, wow. I'm shocked that that's something that's being run on in smart contracts.
There is demand for it, Emery. It's kind of crazy that there are a lot of enterprise programmers who want to compile Java down to WASM.
Yeah, I can see the desire for compatibility point of view. I've done some work related to WASM and in the web space, but yeah, it's actually very, very nice for the web and somewhat horrifying for this purpose. But there you go.
It absolutely is. It's very hard to reverse compile and understand what that code is doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't see the Slack, so can I rely?
Yeah, so let's see. So well, we're getting a question coming in a second. So let me wait while that's typed in. Actually, I do have a question while that's happening. So obviously, you're in Wall Street. Wall Street are your customers. What are the things that they really? You talked about obviously tons of possible benefits of using Avalanche and so on. But what are what is it that they're like? What's the killer app for them? Is there one thing, or is it just like a fat tail?
No, it's a fat tail. And killer apps are really basic things. Like what was the killer? Everybody, remember this, everybody looked for the killer app for the web. And then the killer app for the web was the web, right? Just ability to fetch things. That was really simple. Now, here are some insights that I've gleaned by talking to people on Wall Street. Number one, they will trade anything. So I was worried that crypto might seem too foreign to them. I was worried that they might be like, well, this stuff, we don't know, it's a new asset class, da, da, da. No, they trade pork bellies. They know nothing about pork, right? So they're perfectly comfortable diving into any asset as long as there is liquidity. So they're perfectly comfortable, and this trading comes naturally to them. They love it. So the fact that you've invented a new asset, it's just not an impediment at all for most Wall Street firms. And there is, by and by, there is a growing understanding that this new asset class might actually be decoupled from other kinds of signal in the market and might be decoupled from stocks in some way. There are times it's decoupled and there are times it is coupled. But we will, I believe we will see people go into it. The big funds, hedge funds start to go into it slowly but surely. And we saw both PayPal and Square announce that they're going into the space. Now, as they trade, they're very, very concerned about custody. So all custody in a blockchain happens through cryptographic keys. And management of those keys is a lot harder than one would imagine. And coupling your solution into hardware security modules, into secure wallets is very important to them. And that's to be expected, but I didn't realize just how expected that was, at least initially when I went into the space. Smart contracts are an alluring concept for quite a few, but I don't believe that we will see their application into traditional assets. We're not going to see stocks get replaced by this, that, and the other anytime soon. That's not going to happen overnight tomorrow. It's going to happen slowly as people issue crypto assets for fundraising. And there will be more money issued that way than money issued via traditional equity offerings. So I should mention this, that I did not know this, but if you look at the Bank of America building in Manhattan, those of you who've been to New York City know how big that building is, about 2 floors are dedicated to reconciliation. Reconciliation is simply the act of me making sure that my records are the same as yours and we both agree. And you would think that this should take, you know, I don't know how long, not milliseconds, but it turns out to take human labor to the tune of 2 floors per company that needs to reconcile with the rest of the world. So there are enormous inefficiencies. These are incredibly old systems, very highly layered and very much relying on human intervention with corresponding faults to follow. And so anything that obviates the need for that reconciliation, the financial institutions are quite open to, but they operate at, of course, bank speed. So they were not going to expect overnight changes. Not off Wall Street, there is a burgeoning area of decentralized finance, sometimes called DeFi, where people are inventing new financial products, automated market makers and the like, where people can trade things across the globe and do so very quickly and with high liquidity. And it's been an amazing thing to watch. You know, it's been really fun. There's a lot of experimentation going on. A lot of smart contract bugs are being found. A lot of thefts are happening there. A lot of hacks are happening there. And it's just been a fun ride. Just to watch it all is really interesting. And slowly but surely, there is emerging a new marketplace, an ecosystem of alternative products that rely on the cryptographic foundations of these new assets that give higher assurance and rule out certain kinds of bugs. And in the meantime, they of course introduce their own problems, which all require solving by a multitude of experts.
Sure, that makes sense. So yeah, I think the thing about it that's so funny is that it's an instant bug bounty, right? You don't need Google to pay you for the bug. You pay yourself.
No, it's not $1,500 either. It's much more.
Exactly. So Giannis actually has a question. He asks, could you expand a little more on why it matters that the EVM is confusing and low level? And he also adds, By the way, my impression is that eWASM is all but abandoned. I don't think WASM for Ethereum will be a thing, but I could be wrong.
Oh, he's right that WASM for Ethereum is not going to be a thing. The people behind that push have decided to come up with a new system called Polkadot, and Polkadot is based on WASM. So he's right on that front. The EVM is fine. It's fine if you don't look too carefully into it, but if you do look carefully into it, it really runs counter to the kind of foundation I would like to write analysis on. So the basics, so just to rattle off some issues, the sizes of primitives are really large. So suddenly what you find is inside a single integer variable, you have packed multiple different variables. So if I have a small variable that's 8 bits wide, I can pack a whole bunch of them into a single integer that's 256 bits wide. And so analysis now has to look at this slicing stuff. Let's see, state management is a huge mess. It requires a lot of effort on the system implementation side, and is one of the main problems for why Ethereum's EVM is so slow. So, so making changes to the global database maintained by the EVM implementation is actually fairly onerous, and the accounting model is quite broken. So, for example, to do an addition in EVM, you have to do one addition to do the add itself, and then you have to do another addition to add to the gas costs, a compare to see if you exceeded the gas, and then a whole bunch of activities. So even something as simple as addition is suddenly twice as expensive or more than it should be. And there are many other techniques one could use to build a really efficient virtual machine for use on for use in blockchains than what the EVM is. But I kind of like Solidity personally. It looks kind of like JavaScript. So, it's neither here nor there, but it has its own elegant look. It compiles down to this EVM thing that most people don't have to see. If you do have to play with it, I found it to be not so great. And I mentioned at least 3 reasons why. I'm sure I could rattle off some more with some additional thought. But I do believe that there is a much nicer solution to be had here that is not the EVM. Like if you were to give this as a homework assignment in your PL class, I'm sure you would get something much more compact, much faster than what we have, and much more amenable to JIT compilation.
Sure. So I'll follow up with, so Giannis added a comment, which I'll read in a second. But I mean, how hard is it in terms of adoption? Like, okay, so let me back up. It's a common sort of desire for PL people to be like, all of these PLs are crap. Here's a great one. And it's so beautiful and it'll be terrific. And of course, it's like it's a delightful gem that's sparkly and wonderful that nobody wants and nobody will ever use. And because the reason, well, I mean, it's really, really hard to adopt a PL. A new PL is very expensive in terms of social costs. So how hard is it? How agile is the culture in this world? Is it something where you could actually imagine, look, if I come up with a better mousetrap, people will run to it?
That's such a great question. I don't know where to begin with it. That is the crux of the matter for any academic. And that is the biggest impediment to impact. And you want to pick an ecosystem in which you can have impact, where you will get recognition, where you will get adoption. And when it comes to blockchains, every chain has its own separate culture. It's almost tribal in nature. It's kind of like those guys carrying their coins. Everybody with a bag of digital coins is part of a tribe, and they stick together and they have a common culture that they have flourished together. So Bitcoin, for example, is incredibly averse to any and all change. You can come up with something far better that doesn't change a single one of their security assumptions. And ask me how I know this, because I did that, this protocol called Bitcoin NG, and they will never adopt it because Satoshi was God. How dare you even suggest that you might have improved on any aspect of his work? So Ethereum is much more amenable to adopting new shiny things. In fact, they have a culture of trying to adopt every new shiny thing. And but certain shiny things that have people attached to them are impossible to change. So Ethereum 2.0, for example, is a particular take on how to scale blockchains that I and a couple of other people who understand it well think has some issues with it, and so but they can if they're attached to it. So certain things will be impossible to change, but there is room here. So don't forget the difference between Solidity, the high-level language, and the EVM virtual machine bytecode into which it's compiled, and the EVM interpreter that executes it. So if you come up with something with a new programming language that compiles down to EVM bytecode, no problem. Everybody will adopt it. Avalanche will adopt it. Ethereum will adopt it because it requires no changes. If you maintain Solidity and compile it down to a new virtual machine, then Ethereum will not adopt it. But Avalanche is super eager. We have a community that's very open to this kind of disruptive change, and we are actively looking for these kinds of innovations. We need differentiators at every level. It's not enough, I think, even if you're faster by 1,000, which is qualitatively different, not just quantitatively different. It's not enough, I think. You need to innovate at all levels, which is what we are doing. And we would be so thrilled to adopt a new alternative to the EVM. I know we would. I know there are many new chains coming online. So if you find us hard to work with for whatever reason, which I believe we're one of the nicest, coolest teams, there are other new chains coming online that are also similarly eager to adopt something good. So there is room here. There's quite a bit of room, and the financial bounty is so big that that there are so many concurrent efforts at the same time.
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting space. It's nice to know that, well, nice to know that there's cool people like you out there who are excited to adopt these new things. So I hope people who are out there listening are thinking about this. So Giannis agrees strongly that EVM is bad for analysis. He actually says horrible. It's our biggest headache. To shamelessly plug, we run contract-library.com. Which is probably the most advanced decompiler for EVM bytecode. The decompiler is now open source, and we use it internally as a platform for analyses. So that might be of interest to you and to other folks out there.
Perfect, perfect. Great to hear. I know about that work, but fantastic to hear it here as well. Okay.
Yeah, all right. So, hey, thank you so much for coming and for, you know, what should I say, carving out from your undoubtedly busy schedule of reforming the world's marketplaces to come talk to us about it.
My pleasure, Emery. Thank you so much for having me. We went over by quite a bit, so I hope people enjoyed the discussion.
I certainly hope so, and it's recorded, so so people will be able to watch it later too. All right.